Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. So why don't we go ahead and go around the room and do self-introductions first. I am Jackie Betts, City Administrator.
Nancy Eichstead, FOGNAP and community member.
Sandy Ditmar, community member.
Eric Butler, community member and Parks and Recreation Board.
Justin Prouty, Portland General Electric.
Kim Ballard, community member.
And we don't have Darren today, and I haven't heard from Brittany, so I don't know if she's joining us today or not. But what I did put on the dais for you is some public comments from Linda Cosgrove, who is not here, but I wanted to make sure that you get a copy of her comments for today as well. Okay, so the main objective for this meeting is to see if we can get a final draft of the tree ordinance. According to our timeline, we're supposed to go to the city council on October 8th with an ordinance. If the city wants to submit an application for the Tree City USA program by December 15th, our ordinance has to be in effect 30 days. So that would put us in effect in November, and we would be able to meet that deadline. So in your packet is a copy of the most recent version. And I think we're close. If you look on page 3, there is a comment there. I don't think it's necessarily for this group. It's just a reminder that we'll need to think about what that penalty should be if somebody fails to comply with a section after 30 days. But where we did add language based on our last conversation was on page 6, when it talks about the violations and penalty. There's 2 paragraphs that we added. The second paragraph is one that I'd like you guys to weigh in on, because I'm not sure it's going to be that valid in Gladstone, but we went ahead and put that language in there because there was kind of a consensus that you liked that. So first of all, under violations and penalty, we added in that the fine amount not to exceed $500 per tree. I did pull our city's current enforcement measures with Chapter 17, and that is consistent with what we currently charge. So I think that our agreement on the $500 per tree is good to have there. And then we added language, the city administrator or duly authorized representative is authorized to issue a citation to any person violating any provision of this chapter. In the event that a tree or trees are damaged, destroyed, or wrongfully removed, the appraised value of the plant may be additionally applied to this penalty. The appraised value shall be determined by using the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers Guide for plant appraisal and applied by an ISA certified or ASCA consulting arborist trained in this process. Fines shall be paid into the parks budget and allocated to city tree projects. So how do we feel about that language there?
Yeah, I think that's good too. I guess the question I have is that if you're not exceeding $500 per tree, is the appraised value, would that be in addition to, or is 500 the high limit?
I think the way I understood from Brittany is that it could be that we do a $500, but then we also have the ability to add on the appraised.
Okay, yeah, if that's what you mean, because most certainly, like if you have a larger tree, with the way these appraisal values go, they take into all types of things, like stuff beyond just like what is the timber value of the tree or something like that. So you can get into 20, 30, $40,000 for a mature tree like pretty easily. So I just wanted to make sure that that was.
And I think that's why they also added the language, well, who's going to decide what that appraised value is? So, Brittany provided us the language that we needed and the proper appraisals and certified consulting arborists that we have there.
This is Eric. I wonder if we want to be maybe a little bit more specific about when the additional penalty may be applied, just so it doesn't create the opportunity for any sort of arbitrary or a kind of biased application like this. It's like I could see if it's just kind of purely discretionary, there's potential for at least people questioning when that additional penalty could apply. So I'm not sure if we necessarily want to spell or get too specific on that, but at the very least, it's kind of there's that door open for additional penalties, just not clear when or why that would be applied.
Well, I read it as it'd be up to the city administrator or an authorized representative to make that determination.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'll make a note there. Okay, so then the second paragraph that we added was, this is the language where any arborist, landscaper, contractor, or tree service that has performed any tree removal in violation of this section or submitted a falsified report in connection with any tree removal or application for any tree removal covered by this section shall not be considered a responsible bidder for any certain contracts for a period of 5 years from the date of violation and/or penalty, whichever is later. The city council may, at its discretion, waive this provision upon a showing of good cause. We can leave that in there. I don't think that we would have to use it that often in the city of Gladstone, but certainly I will leave that up to the group to decide, come to a consensus on that language.
It doesn't hurt anything to have it there, so why not?
I'm a little bit amused by the whichever is later, because it's a little hard to imagine a penalty preceding a violation.
And I think similar to you, Sandy, I think it's a thing that I don't know, Gladstone, how you select your contractors and things like that, but it's good and might help you out down the road from avoiding maybe irresponsible people that can weasel their way through the bidding process and show they're a responsive bidder, but if they've showed that they're not, ethical or qualified, I think that's a good thing to leave it in there.
What happens if a person doesn't pay this fine?
Well, it would follow the enforcement procedures through our code that has a whole process of what we do if anybody doesn't pay their fines. They're compounded. Code enforcement, police chief get involved. It's a whole process that it would go through. Yes.
So I didn't really come to this board to really think about the penalties and the rules and the laws pertaining to a tree ordinance. So this is all kind of different to me. And I'm kind of an idea that punishment should not be a part of the tree ordinance, that reparative justice is sort of what I think should be something that should be applied more than punitive. And I don't really know how that would look in a tree ordinance. I haven't really thought about it. I've just sort of been sort of taken aback sometimes by some of the ideas of penalizing people for maybe doing an honest mistake, but sometimes it's probably not honest, or that they just, people just figure it's my tree, and so I can do whatever I want with it. So, or I planted that tree. And but I see trees being cut down all the time that probably could have been saved by judicious pruning rather than removal. In fact, I just saw one of those this morning. So I don't know. I'd like to see, and I don't really have a way of. It's just my opinion that I just like to see less, um, you know, fines and things like that.
How do you enforce something if you don't hang a dollar threat on somebody?
Well, there are people that are cleaning up highways that maybe can't pay a fine, and so they're doing community service. Maybe Trump will be doing some community service someday too, but it doesn't always have to involve money. I don't think.
Are you thinking about where some towns around us are requiring 2 trees to be planted if 1 tree was taken out incorrectly? Is that what you're thinking?
Not really, but I'm not opposed to some idea like that. I mean, if there's room for 2 trees, but there isn't always room, to do that.
And I think that was discussed at our last meeting. Brittany had some reasons why you can't just double up the trees there,
Mhm.
but also wanted to share that there's an education piece that goes with this new law that Gladstone would be adopting. And so I think our approach would not be to just go out and penalize and violate. We want to educate people first so they know what they can and can't do about that. So your point is well taken on that. Eric, did you want to say something?
I was more or less going to say what you were going to say. I think that being really proactive and just staying active in communicating the process and what the rules are and really making it easy for people to follow the rules and providing the informational and assistance resources to be able to stay in compliance is really, hopefully that should mean that we won't need to get into dealing with enforcement and punishment very often.
I had some tree work done some years back, and they were asking me what kind of ordinances Gladstone had, and wouldn't do the work, until I showed that there wasn't anything. I also wanted them to trim on the neighbor's property, which was agreed on with the neighbor. And I had to get written statements. So I think if somebody's dealing with a reputable arborist, the arborist is going to be asking these questions, providing that education by default.
And I do also see in here that it does say that it's a firm or corporation. So I'm assuming that allows the city the ability to issue that citation to the tree service rather than the homeowner. It's entirely possible. You hire someone who's your plumber. You don't know anything about plumbing. They do a bad job, right? That could happen with tree work too. But if people are being taken advantage of by unscrupulous tree services, I think we can the city has that discretion, the way I read it, to issue the citation to them rather than just the homeowner who maybe did not understand or assume their contractor was doing their due diligence.
Jackie, will this go into effect as soon as it's voted on? And would we do the education before that or after that? Because I would hate to see the education piece trigger a bunch of people to cut trees down before it goes into effect.
Well, an ordinance takes 30 days to go into effect. So if they adopted it October 8th, it would go into effect November 8th. And part of that would just making people be aware that this is going into effect for that in November. And then in the Public Works Department, we still have to put the permit process together and get that available before it would go into effect as well. And ordinances can be living documents. This is our first best attempt at putting it into place for Gladstone, and we may find in a year some things have happened that make us want to amend our ordinance as well.
So along that line, I was wondering, so like when we come up with a list of recommended trees, so, as the climate keeps changing, I'm wondering how that tree list, for example, could be amended to eliminate some trees and to add others. And also, I don't remember if there was a list of, trees that were, not recommended, that were prohibited even, in fact.
Well, the tree list will be a living document, yes. So, and I think that's kind of the next assignment for the ad hoc committee is to talk about, because ours is so old, we need to update our tree list. But I think that is one that wouldn't necessarily be tied to the ordinance. That could be updated as you said, things change for that.
So who will be able to update it?
Well, I don't think we've determined an answer to
Oh,
that
okay.
yet. I'd be happy if we just got an updated tree species list in place to start.
I've been driving the streets of Gladstone, measure with my tape measure. And there's really not that much area that even has this parking strip that is such an issue. It, from probably north of Hereford a little, if you went all the way down, maybe Kenmore or so, down to Arlington, Oatfield to McLaughlin, there are parking strips between 5 and 6 feet wide. Occasionally, there's a street with 6.5, probably a different person working that day or something, but that's where they are. The east side of Oatfield, there's very little. Most of the sidewalks are out next to the curb or nothing, or it's just a 30-inch wide, which is what's in my neighborhood. And that's not really suitable for any trees. So, we talked so much about tree canopy, building tree canopy, being able to walk your dog without getting hot feet. There's only that part of town where that can be achieved. So I was kind of like, when I got done with this, I was kind of like, so what's the point here? But we have to have something in place. I asked Darren if there was any kind of an inventory, and this was before I started driving around. No, there isn't. Inventory on parking strips, and there isn't. I wonder, even though there's not development going on now, and there's really no place for it, anything built in the future, like in that urban renewal area that's being established, if they tear down a dwelling and put more homes on it or whatever, that there's a requirement for a wider parking strip so that this can be achieved.
And that's a good example. So if the city council approves the urban renewal district expansion, then the city will be going through a process of completing a final streetscape design on Portland Avenue, which would include wider sidewalks and that could incorporate more tree canopy type elements there. So that's a great example of where in the future we could potentially have more trees or a canopy for that. Brittany is also joining us on Zoom. Hi, Brittany.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I'm a little late.
We are actually on page 6 of the ordinance, and I think we're pretty close to finalizing language in the draft ordinance. Unless you had any input on the changes that we put under violations and penalty.
So I do have a couple of thoughts. I'm curious, it's also jumping ahead slightly, but I'm curious if we've gotten any community engagement survey information back that would help inform what the content should be, or if that's going to be something that we'll kind of save for future revision.
I don't have, Katie, do you know how many surveys we've received back? 25. Okay, and I don't have access to that information yet, so I would say it would not factor into this here. It'll probably go to the city council October 8th.
Then my second thought is it's so kind of most of the ordinance is written essentially assuming that all trees are street trees, and which still doesn't always necessarily make sense for sort of natural resource and development park areas. So not sure if that's been incorporated throughout, but just and still a thought.
Yeah, I was wondering if Brittany could find any language about that in terms of how to address our native areas like the nature park in a way that it is more appropriate than the street tree rules.
I mean, the street tree rules really mostly apply to homeowners anyway. So it's not like the city would fine itself or leave you a stump in the nature park or something.
We're probably not going to grind any stumps in the nature park.
Yeah, that was the one question I had, Brittany. I don't know if you and Darren had any action regarding the natural areas versus the street tree rules, or if there was language that needed to be incorporated into this.
Yeah, I'll have to read this draft again with that lens, I think. I did share with Darren some example languages from the city of Salem and Lake Oswego that addresses naturalized areas or trees in those similar situations that we could pull from.
That
But I
goes,
guess I would ask this group like what in our current draft is missing, and is there any concern for those specific areas, and then where are they in the city? I think I had asked if there were like maps with tax lot lines, just so that I can kind of get a understanding of like what is a naturalized area in Gladstone and who manages that. Because that will kind of inform what our language looks like.
So, I mean, I would imagine, just so I understand, so right now, if somebody decides to go into a park in Gladstone and cut down a tree, there would be no citation or anything you could issue them?
yeah, we could.
Because they're destroying.
Correct.
So,
Yeah.
so it seems like you kind of already have that covered elsewhere in your city code. I don't know that you need to break out naturalized areas because by default, the city is the only people that should be doing any maintenance in there. If other people are going in there, then they're vandalizing. The only thing would be maybe to hold contractors you have accountable who do some of that tree work, maybe as having that kind of standard. And if you don't want to tie yourself to it, you could just remove the language of removing stumps in parks, and that's kind of up to the discretion of, again, the city who already manages those areas. I think it simplifies things a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing for me too, just kind of giving the city some discretion around stumps and hazard trees within parks. Because obviously it's not something that homeowners are going to be dealing with. It's mostly just kind of making sure that the city isn't kind of obligated to certain management practices that don't always make sense in certain contexts.
So Brittany, maybe you and I need to have a side conversation regarding that piece of it.
that sounds good.
to do that. Um, I would like to be able to show the feedback from the surveys to this group before we go to city council, though. I do think that that would be an important piece of information for you guys to have. So that means, though, that if we met again in October, we would probably be pushing our meeting out to council in November. Brittany, does the ordinance have to be in effect before the city can apply for the application in December for you as the Tree City?
Mm. It has to be in effect before the end of the year.
Okay,
I could extend your application timeline so that as long as it's like in effect by the end of 2024, then you'll be eligible to meet that standard.
so if the council adopted it on November 12th and it went into effect December 12th, we should still be fine.
Yes.
Okay. So,
And you can still fill out like the rest of your application and save it in the portal and then go back in and attach your ordinance after it's been finalized later.
okay.
Don't we have a meeting the first Friday of October, which would be, it's like the third or fourth, I believe, that would be before that city council meeting.
But
Is
the
that at
packet has
time?
to go out a week before.
Okay.
So that's why if we still have time, it sounds like I just bought ourselves another month, then I would like to bring back the community engagement survey results for this group to look at, as well as any language that we put in for natural area versus the street tree rules, so that we could have one more final look at a draft ordinance before it goes to council. And then also we have work to do on the street tree list as well. Unless the group wants to make a decision today about the tree ordinance and keep the timeline that we have in October, I will let you guys decide.
I think the community engagement piece is important. And, you know, at this point, it's 25 people. We probably won't learn a whole lot, but it keeps the actions of this committee and the whole process credible in my mind.
$25 is actually a lot for Gladstone, so yeah.
I don't know, 25 seems like a paltry number to me, and, to base a decision on the input of 25 people who are just regular citizens who maybe think something's a good idea isn't really to me, is not a really way to make a good decision. I think that actually this board talking among themselves and working together is probably going to make a better decision than whatever the input might be from the community. And because, I mean, we see this all the time that, there's really complex, like a call-in talk show, really complex discussions arise, and then people are asked to call in and give their opinion about something that's, very convoluted, but yet the people that are maybe presenting it know a lot more about it than the people who are commenting. So I think that basically, I think this group can probably make better decisions amongst themselves.
I mean, we're not obligated to take everyone's suggestions either, especially because a lot of them are going to be contradictory and impossible to reconcile. But at the very least, it's entirely possible that someone will have an idea for something that's useful, or we'll see that something we're proposing is going to be deeply controversial or something like that. So I feel like it's a good kind of gut check on the process, but it's not binding us to change anything if we feel like what we have is solid.
Kim, just a comment here about you not wanting to punish people for what they do to their trees. I've seen a lot of stuff going on in the parks where people have cut trees, they've set fire to trees, they planted trees that are inappropriate, just all on their own. And while that's against all the park rules, there aren't any real fines associated with any of that behavior. I don't think anybody's ever been hauled away to jail for cutting down a tree in the park. So I just want to temper, I don't think we should fine our neighbors if they're misbehaving, but it's just one of the tools that we sometimes have to consider.
But then is that because you don't catch them, or because I think a lot of people do stuff like that, they're going to do it when they think they're not going to be found out? And we were just saying that, destruction of public property is already on the books. So that it seems like they can be fined or prosecuted or whatever now.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to catch them and to put them all the way through the process, but I would reserve that assessment for our code enforcement people.
So I'd weigh in that. I think this I feel is pretty good. I don't really see anything in here besides small kind of semantic changes that maybe we would make, but I would say I defer to the community members here on what you think about if it's ready, because ultimately the people on the board that live here will be people that live with it and are better representatives for the community. But I think as far as the substance goes, I think this is very good. Good start to get Gladstone going with some sort of tree program.
I think we're pretty close. I see an opportunity here to maybe consider a way to emphasize the value of trees in our community for everyone. But I'd like to see those two documents that Brittany sent to Darren just to kind of review, maybe just a sentence or a paragraph about our value of trees would make me happy. But other than that, I think it's pretty good.
I think that's more or less what I was saying, though, also that, I don't have any problems with, proceeding with the ordinance, whether we get the community input or not.
I can still share the community input with this group. Sounds like Brittany and I will have a conversation to try to finalize a little bit of language. I can still send that to the group as well. I agree that I think we're there with the draft ordinance. So if we want to keep that October timeline, I'm fine with that. So are there any other comments regarding the tree ordinance or the community engagement survey? We can move on to the tree species list.
So you're going to present the community engagement at the same time that you present the draft to city council?
It'll go in the packet, but I want to make sure this group gets it before it goes in the packet as well.
That should be fine.
Yes. And I'm sure a lot of them say, yes, we want more trees. That's what I'm guessing, because I saw some at the community festival and that's what they put. Yes, we want more trees, but I don't know what the other comments said, so.
What put me on my measuring parking strips in Gladstone project was, do you think tree canopy distribution is equitable across different neighborhoods? So I was thinking, can it be? And the majority of the neighborhoods, unless you plant it in your front yard, which this ordinance has nothing to do with, there's not going to be equitability no matter what is decided.
Well, I think that was an excellent idea that you had, going around and measuring, because it really kind of puts things in perspective for us that maybe we're sort of like overdoing it, for what we actually have sort of authority over.
I mean, again, too, I feel like we're doing this with the understanding that it's the first step in a longer process as well, and that it's kind of starting that conversation that could potentially lead to further policy in the future. But we're starting with what makes sense to start with right now.
Okay. So the tree species list, Brittany had provided some information to all of you. Brittany, how would you suggest that we move ahead with this process?
Yeah, I think this might be a conversation that would be important to have Darren in, or I guess I'm just not sure like what the planting strip widths look like. Um, and if we want to sort of like separate, obviously you want to separate out your recommended or your approved species list by planting site. So like small, medium, large by maximum, minimum width. Sort of depends on what that looks like in Gladstone. But I think a good place to start is the recommended tree list for west of the Cascade Range, north of Roseburg. It's a pretty all-inclusive list. And this list also has species that I think will be able to find from nurseries near you.
Should this list be a list of good trees? Or should it be a list of trees for, do we narrow it down and just put trees appropriate for the planting strips? What kind of a list do we want this to be? Because 3/4 of this doesn't fit in the
Mhm.
planting strips that exist in Gladstone.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I feel like we first want to know like what the planting space, like available planting space looks like, and then maybe separating it out by approved street tree list and maybe an approved park tree list, but that's more for city because there aren't any homeowners, right, that are going to be planting trees in parks or naturalized areas. So you could have a list for those areas, but you don't necessarily. I think just starting with a street tree list is a good place.
I think we should for sure just have the street tree list.
Yeah.
And then if we decide we're going to mess with yard trees, that would be a whole other
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, and then I also think it would be good to have a list of trees that you cannot plant specifically. And that could also include yards.
So then
Like-
I would, if it's just gonna be a street tree list, and I agree with that, we would want to narrow this down so there was nothing the minimum would be like 8 foot and up, we would take off this list. Because there are 4 and 6 foot indicated on here, and there are parking strips that meet that.
Mhm.
But there's also some that are smaller,
Mhm.
and they're really not appropriate for trees, but anything that's 8 and up, take it off.
Yeah, I would say we also want to think about what the future might look like. So if you did end up putting in larger planting spaces, I agree with you. I think they need to be separated out by appropriate size, right? Like we don't want to be planting large form trees in small planting strip widths because then you're going to cause a lot of issues. But if you separated them out by like these species are approved for large, however you want to define that planting strip width, then those folks couldn't plant anything in those, like those species in smaller planting widths anyway, if that makes sense. So it's sort of like there's the approved list, and then it's broken down into like these species are approved for small planting strips, medium, and large.
This also gets to why the planting list is separate from the ordinance anyways, that if we get to a point where there are end up being larger planting strips, then we can always amend
Update
the
it.
list to add trees appropriate to the sites.
So Brittany, do you need some more internal work with staff before we can move forward understanding our planting strip widths?
Yeah, I think just like having an idea of what the city structure looks like as far as available planting spaces. And then we can use this as a reference and start parsing things out. This could be something I work with Darren and you on, and then we can bring it back to the group if that makes sense.
Does that make sense to all of you? Okay.
Well, they're 5 to 6 foot is what the majority of them are. The ones that do exist. There isn't all that many when you look at the number of properties in the town.
Really a small, medium and large.
No,
Yeah.
no. There was a couple of, I've got 5, 5.5. One side of the street on Fairfield by the grade school is 7. That's the only one that's that wide. But 5 to 6 is about all we've got, or 30-inch.
Well, I mean,
That's
there are
not-
also potentially places where the street right of way extends into what looks like a front yard, and there isn't necessarily an offset sidewalk there as well. So public right of way doesn't necessarily mean that there is a sidewalk or in a parking strip.
That's true. Very true. So are we does this regulate that? When there's no curb? There's no curb.
I mean, it does say in the text that anything that is within the public right of way is considered a street tree, or whether there's a offset sidewalk or not.
But then if we start to address something like that, then, so say someone has planted a larger tree in that area that has no curb, and then someday they put in a sidewalk, then are they going to have to take out trees to put in a sidewalk?
I don't know how we got so many streets that didn't have sidewalks, but it seems like that would be an extreme case. Unless it's like a major arterial, like Oakfield Road got a sidewalk, but they put it on the park side. So I don't know what our code covers after the fact. We're not, I don't know, like Glen Echo might get a sidewalk.
I wish.
Yeah, it would be like Jennings is right now too, if we did sidewalk up Glen Echo there.
So then, since the majority of, from your measurements, the majority of the spots are between 5 and 6 feet, why don't we just recommend trees to start that were appropriate for that size? And like Jackie says, the document is a living document and it can be amended.
So that brings it down to the ones on this list that say 4 and 6 foot.
Mhm.
And that's how I see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that I don't know if we have lots of trees on there, it might overwhelm people a little bit. Like I'm looking through this, like I'm an arborist, I'm like, wow, that's a lot to choose from. So we might overwhelm people. But I think the advantage of having all those trees on there is that people can use this for planting trees in their yard. It doesn't have anything to do with this ordinance, but it's like a good resource for people. And then I think that might be able to guide city staff on where they're planting trees in parks and things like that too, in other areas where maybe there is more space. It's not just the planting strip area. I think the key would be, I don't think we can use this list as it's presented to us right now. It needs to be filtered and sorted in like a much more digestible way because I think
Agreed.
I'm just looking through it, Brittany, but it looks like there's like stuff for, uh even regions outside of here, right? Or is it just Southwest Portland?
So I mean, it's anything west of the Cascades and north of Roseburg. So they're, I think you're right in that this is a good place to start. And then we can narrow it down more specifically to Gladstone and available planting sites, things like that. So I would be glad to take the initial list and try to narrow that down with city staff, and then bringing that back to you all, if that's a good process.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I think the full list is good as an informational resource for people who are interested in planting trees in their own yard. Then we can extract a subset that are appropriate to street tree situations.
Yeah. And the other benefit of having more trees rather than less on your list is that you want to be able to provide diversity in your urban forest so that you can be more resilient to pests and pathogens. Not to say that like every single one of these trees is going to be easy to obtain from nurseries, but I don't think it hurts to have more trees rather than less on your list, to encourage diverse planting.
And then on the line item for the different trees, where it's just genus and species listed, add appropriate cultivars. Because, well, it can have the common name there also, but you know, where you're just specifying, yeah, then put appropriate cultivars, because people don't understand that. I mean, you can have you know, in my world, a Norway spruce, you think 100 feet tall. Well, no, there's ones that are like 1 foot tall. So, no, they're different. They're different.
She's talking
But-
about dwarfs.
Yeah, I'm talking about dwarf conifers, but anyway, I think that would be a good thing to add to the list. So people that, when they go to the garden center and they see, Cryptomeria japonica and then another name beyond that, they need to look at the tag and see the growth form and everything that's on that. Just say, well, it's a Cryptomeria japonica, it must be okay.
Are we including things like that in this list?
It's on the list. My eye just
Okay.
stopped at that
Okay.
point on the list, and no, that one should not be. I do not agree with that.
I mean, there's such a bewildering array of cultivars and such too that is potentially I agree, but it's also potentially a rabbit hole we could go down and spend a lot of time looking at a lot of different kinds of trees.
Yeah, we don't want to put specific names because availability for one. But if we just put appropriate, that terminology, appropriate cultivars, then that'll help community members ask the question, what does that mean? Or this must be okay. I'm reading the tag.
Or maybe spell out kind of expected growth dimensions is kind of way of making it clear what appropriate cultivar means. So like you don't want to get a full-size tree, but if there's like you can pick any of several kinds of dwarf varieties of something as long as they once they sort of meet certain size or within a certain size range.
So maybe this is a can of worms, but there are some shrubs that can be pruned into becoming trees and small trees. So would this ordinance have anything to say about that, about shrubs? I mean,
think-
I'm thinking of some like manzanita and ceanothus, for example, that can become small trees, and some are ground covers.
That's where appropriate cultivar comes into play.
But they're not. Can let them be a shrub, but if you want to prune them to like one front.
Single stem. And that's why you've got Latin names here and the common name, you know, you're going by that name. It doesn't say, Coprinus betulus tree, doesn't say that. So I think you're okay.
So it sounds like Thank you, Sandy, for your inventory, 5 to 6 feet planting strip. Brittany and I are going to work internally on narrowing down a specific list for Gladstone to bring back for you guys to then start considering. Does that work? Okay.
And it's gonna be emailed to us.
Yeah, we can email it to you ahead of the meeting. So I have a note that our next meeting is October 4th. Brittany and I have some work to do. In the meantime, I'm going to get the survey results gathered for this group as well. We're good on the ordinance. I think we're in good shape.
Can I comment on Linda's comments that we're not forcing someone to plant a tree in their parking strip? We're talking about what's already there. If your parking strip's empty right now, there's no expense to, for you. So if we were saying everybody has to plant a tree, that would be a different deal. So I don't know that, there's an issue with expense to the homeowner if that tree is already there.
So let me just read her comments, Sandy, so they know what your rebuttal to. So Linda says, good morning. I'm sorry to be so slow to respond. On Friday mornings, I volunteer at a hospice facility on Oakfield Road. The entire parking strip mandate coming out of this committee is unfair to the homeowner. This should be on a voluntary basis. The city should assist by having a tree giveaway in the fall and a discount on the water bill for those homeowners who want to participate. The reason that people are filling their parking strip with rocks is due to the water bill. When families are paying such high rent and high water bills and have children in school, the first expense to cut is the parking strip. Everyone knows that trees go on sale at Home Depot in the fall. Homeowners don't need to be driving miles to source their plantings. Again, this entire proposal is unfair to the homeowner. And I think, Sandy, that's why you were commenting that you're correct. We're not forcing people to have them in the planting strips. Okay, so if there's not any other business, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting, and we will meet again on October 4th. Thank you, everyone.